Then,
Yep.
well, we are happy to bring on our regular Wednesday morning guest, Scott Walter. How are you today?
Okay. Little delayed. It was one of those morning things where I had like absolute trivial thing to take care of.
Trivial.
A trivial thing, and you know how it results in a cascade of like disasters after that. All I had to do was replace a short section of garden hose.
A short section of garden
hose, yeah, and then the PVC fitting that was in there decided to fail on me because the salt water, makes these things really hard to do. And I'm not that strong, I wasn't like really torquing on the thing, and the thing is like, and all I know is when it comes to plumbing, don't put me anywhere near a Raptor engine, because if you ask me to fix that thing, guaranteed there's going to be pipes and fittings like failing everywhere. So the next thing, so it was like a $5 exercise ended up to being like probably a $60 one by the time I had to get like, new spigot, Teflon tape, more fittings, everything else.
Yeah.
And I had Old Faithful going there. So I had to run out and like, turn the water off the whole house. So yeah, that's my morning.
I have a few plumbing stories, but we won't, especially at my age, but we won't go into any of that.
Yeah, especially if they have to do with the loo. Plenty of those too.
All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and engage you this morning with your 10 questions, or however many it turned out to be, with regard to upcoming meetings. We've got the 10-10 meeting coming. Really coming up fast. It's just amazing how quickly it's approaching. Then we've got, of course, the earnings call, and then we have every day. We can put questions up and see if we have a response. Yeah. So we're looking for the questions. And by the way, folks, put your questions down there too. We'd love to hear from you, and also your comments with regard to Scott's questions. So Scott, are these in particular order?
Well, we'll try. I'm really bad at doing this because whenever someone puts me in the spot, a bunch of questions, suddenly I freeze up and I can't come up with any.
Oh.
And my assumption is when you talk about the earnings calls, like, one of those questions you want to put out and say or something like that. And, trying to come up with a question that either hasn't already been answered, we don't already know the answer to, or is not going to be one of those where the response is, this is the inappropriate form for it. That's going to be for a product release or something like that, or just something that will get under Elon's skin. And then he just will, go off on something else. So it's like, okay, what should the questions be? What are the obvious ones coming up? And anything to do with like the financial stuff, I'm leaving that for you and Larry. I mean, that's your wheelhouse. I'm not going to come up with something like that of like, what are the earnings per share forecast for the next 4 quarters or some silly thing like that. I wouldn't even know what those numbers are going to be. Okay. So I'll try to stick to the technical stuff. And see, I don't know if any of these forms are the right ones. So they're more or less, let's just say, itching questions, answers to, and maybe someone can rephrase those to be appropriate. So I guess there's going to be a bunch of questions people have for 1010. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, that's just all about robotaxi and everything like that.
Sure.
And I think there's no point to have any questions because they're going to be answered that day. Is it 2-door? Is it 4-door? It's like, how many wheels is it going to have? What's the range? It's like, those are all going to be answered, and you're going to find out on that day. So for the most part, I'm just going to like, there's no sense answering them because I think asking them because they're mostly going to be answered. Now, one that I'll kind of put in there, which is, let's say, is kind of an irritant for me, is like, when will FSD actually be available on the Cybertruck? It's like that to me, that's, and I know there's been some timelines out there, but it's really kind of vague, and they're kind of moving. So it's a moving target right now.
Last I heard it was September, but and we're
still in there. And the thing is it might be kind of like, the rollout for hardware 3, version 12.
Yeah,
it's on there, but it just, misbehaves and everything else. So I'm really talking about, when you're going to get it and when can we really say it's reliable and stable. So they might push something out, but, I'd rather them just say, we're working on it. It won't be until December.
Yeah.
And then when we release it, it's going to be really good, rather than this, we think it's going to be in 10 days and it's not 10 days and they feel pressure to put something out and then it doesn't work out well. Because I would be much happier with 12.3.6 right now than what I have on my hardware 3, because 12.3.6 was not perfect. It was really good. And I kind of knew where I had to be careful of. And this, now it's like, well, wait a minute, all the things that 12.3.6 solved, it's like you're racing over speed bumps, like all these other little things are just like, I don't know what the limitations are. So please go back until they get those ironed out.
Now you haven't gotten 12.5.2.1 yet? Okay.
No. So I'm waiting for that.
Better. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully for hardware 3, hopefully that means, because everyone I talked about hardware 4, they're like, it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. It's like, yeah, but when they did the compression, it just didn't work out the same. So, so that's my first question. And then I'll try to kind of stay a little bit in the Optimus area and then based a little bit on current events. So one of the big questions that I've had with everyone is like, wow, 100 million 4680s, are the 4680s going on Optimus? Because we're talking about, millions of Optimi and stuff like that. So, okay, we're not talking about millions of Optimi until, maybe 5 to 6 years, according to Elon's timeline. That's one of the things that he laid out about a week ago. And if you really look at the number of batteries that Optimus needs, you can make 33 Optimi from one Model Y battery pack. Okay. So that means 1 million Optimi would take about 30,000 Model Ys off the road as far as production. And what's that like? Is that just like 10 days of production? So it's like, it's a drop in the bucket. We're talking way out. So it's not like they need the 4680s. The other thing is, what's the 80 mean in 4680 and what does the 70 mean in 2170?
It's the diameter.
The can height.
The height of the can. Okay. Yeah.
The height of the can, right? And so the 4680 is a little bit taller, which means that you just can't, do a swap out. You would have to make the depth of the torso a little bit more. And, it's got a bigger diameter. So basically it means you would have to re-engineer that whole thing. So it's not going into Gen 2. So that's pretty much what it means. And also the energy density of the 4680 right now is not as good as the 2170, partly because the 4680 is designed for structural and you don't need that kind of structural loading in a Optimus.
Right.
You'll actually be able to pack more on a smaller volume and get more energy in that small, and that's key. You want to be able to have that as well. So right now the 2170 is the best form factor for the humanoid bots. And like I say, to put it in there would just mean you have to kind of redesign the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that means, well, there is a redesign coming. And that's both with the hand in the Gen 2. So that was my second question. My third question is kind of like, and we know sort of the answer is the current status of the 22 Freedom hand. And so we've been hearing some evolution. I believe when it was announced, they had probably just made the decision or really thinking about it of what the next hand should look like. And so that's back on the 5th of May, but they didn't have anything. And they've been working on it. And again, I think it was like last week, Elon said that it's still in the prototype phase, which means it's not attached to an arm head or something like that. It's basically like on a lab bench. They're all trying to work it out. And it may be evolving a little bit because at first he was saying most of the actuators will go into the forearm to now sound like they're all going to go there. So again, it's like, it's an evolving design. I'd like to know a little bit more. I think we know enough about it. So, but the big question is what kind of actuators are going to be using for that? Obviously there's going to be tendons because he's saying in advance, like, okay, but how are you going to pull in the tendons? Do you have something new there? Because I think they won't do it with like little rotary motors or something. There's going to be a different design there. So that's going to be very different. The Gen 3 status, a question is like, kind of where you are on that. I think we know the answer. And the answer is that he says it's still in the design phase. So it's not like they're building or testing or have the first one put together. It's still in design. So they're really giving this a long think. They were quickly able to go from Gen 1 to Gen 2 because that was just a very simple evolution of an existing design, just like a lot of refinements, and they just like popped out almost overnight. This is taking a bit longer because they're not just making refinements. They're really going top down, looking the whole thing over. And, everything from, the types of actuators going to be using. So they may have new actuators, or they may be deciding to go all rotary and get rid of the linear drives, because I think that's where there has been some problems. And I'll kind of get to that as one of my questions way down here. The other questions that most people have is like, how many Gen 2 are there out there already? How many Optimi do
Okay,
you have?
how many there are, or how many there are working in the factory, or both? Or...
Yeah, well, I'm kind of getting to that. So that's like question 5. It's like, well, how many are there? I mean, we've seen maybe in the order of a dozen or so, something like that. How many are actually operating in a factory? Because remember, back in June, I think it was, we saw Optimus working in the factory, and that was on the battery line.
Right.
And then another member of the team posted something out a day or two after that. It's like, how soon do you think before we have like 10 different operations being done? Yeah. And it was like, oh, you must already have that. And so that was like, you must be really close. And then it's been cricket since then. and then in August, when Figure came out, there was like a little bit of exchange, let's say, between Brett and Milan, and Milan was like, oh, we've got an update coming soon, like all sorts of wonderful things. Cricket since then. So it's been over 6 weeks. So either that means they're keeping something under wraps, or maybe it's not. So I don't know. I don't know how to read that signal. There's that if they actually have something, then show it, please.
Yeah. So have some updates here.
let's get an update. Yeah. So and then and then of course the other thing is it's been mentioned that there will be 1,000 or more working in the Tesla factories. So that means, okay, have you at least identified what are all those operations that you're seeing, and what are the tasks you plan on doing? Yeah. So have you identified them? How many are similar? So again, we've talked about the loading of the sheet metal, which Figure shows like an example of that. That's one station. There's lots of stations like that, but I'm not sure it adds up to thousands. Okay. It might get close to that. So it's like, okay, then what are the other operations you're seeing around there that may be like supporting operations to it and everything else? How you identify those things, and what is your confidence level of being able to accomplish those things? So, that what I'd like to kind of know where they are on that. And then sort of the other thing is looking at the current walking speed of Gen 2. Have they been able to make any improvements on that? Because we haven't got an update. I mean, we saw it do kind of a figure 8 going around, and, it was like able to kind of, but we haven't really seen it do an operation that requires walking. The battery doesn't require anything. That's a very simple pick and place. You can almost argue you don't even need the legs on that. So we haven't seen it actually do an operation where it needs to do that. And the speed seems to be very limiting. The other thing we haven't seen is we haven't seen it do stairs or ramps or any kind of rough terrain, which we're seeing plenty of videos coming out of China every day, just showing that and showing how stable it is. So I'm like, all right, what's going on there? And it sort of comes down to, what are the current bottlenecks, or what are the issues that you've discovered from Gen 2 that's requiring you to go to Gen 3? And
would you put in that same question things like ability to quickly turn to the left or turn to the right or go? Or
yeah. I mean that's all going to be part of it. So and a lot of those is is that if you have a human bot, the number of actuators you actually need to walk straight forward, you could almost say you could just practically do with one that's geared right, because we have those little robot toys that could do that, right? Yeah. So really, that swinging axis is very important to be able to go fast. Yeah. And so if you've got that down, okay, you can walk fast. But in order to turn, that means you've got to do something to make your leg do this, which means you got to have an actuator up here that's able to do that as well as get the balance. And so a lot of them, you see, they're making those little steps because it's a balancing problem they're having there, or for some reason they don't have enough torque in that particular actuator to be able to do it. So in order to turn, you need other muscle groups. And when I was a cross country runner, I learned that the hard way is that we just basically run straight the whole time, right? And then when the cross country season was over, we all got together. We played a game of basketball. We figured we're all in good shape. The next day, we were feeling muscle groups we didn't even know existed, because there's a lot of like left and right and lateral movement and stuff like that. It's very, very different. And so you begin to discover that, if you're just going straight, you're going to atrophy a lot of these other things, and you've got to balance it out, figure it out.
Have you ever windsurfed?
Yes.
Of all the things I've ever done in my life, that one uses the most muscle groups.
Yeah, it could. Well, like all things is like when I first did windsurfing, I just like went out there, picked it up and tried to do it and had no idea what I was doing. And then finally took a lesson, and they showed you it's like this is how it's done. And I was like, looking, it's like, oh, I was doing everything wrong. Where my foot was planted, how I do to turn around. I mean, it's like, once you learn the trick to doing it, it's all then very easy. But if you don't do it right, yeah, you're going to be using a lot of muscle groups to try to balance stuff. So it's like everything. The professionals know the trick that makes it very, very easy. And sometimes even just observing them, if you're not really observant, you're assuming they're doing it one way, and it's like, nope, there's something else. And so when it comes to the walking speed, I suspect like the whole design of the lower leg and everything's gonna be wrong. The more and more I'm looking at it, I really think that Bernd is right about these high gear ratio actuators as being very, very limiting. So we were very impressed with the power that these linear actuators are able to do that are in the leg, because we can see it can lift a grand piano. What that means is Optimus can probably do a pretty good deadlift. You can give it a lot of weight and it'll just be able to slowly lift that thing up. But you cannot, just because it's very powerful, it's got a lot of strength, doesn't mean it has a lot of speed.
Right.
And a lot of reason it doesn't have the speed is because the gear ratio is killing you on that. All right. So the whole idea of trying to get the torque that everyone wants to have is say, okay, we'll have these motors spinning really, really fast because we want to get the RPM that's in there. And now we're going to use this transmission that's like a 1 to 100 to take that, and that will give us the torque we want. Okay, so I get something that's spinning at 2,000 RPM. Sounds really fast, right? Get a gear ratio of 1 to 100. Suddenly, it's only rotating at 20 RPM.
Yeah.
Okay. That gear ratio does the same thing to velocity as it does to acceleration. So that means that little motor that's spinning in there, if you need to get that acceleration that you kind of need to really be able to get your gate up and going, it's got to have a lot in there. And then the other thing is again, you're as you go through that, the torque transparency gets really bad. So the control system's not even sure what it needs to deliver, because it loses a little bit in that relationship. You don't, because you've got first and second order and sometimes third order derivatives you want to do. When you start putting scaling and stuff like that in that, then noise starts getting in there, and you can't trust any of the signals that are coming out. So you would be a lot better to have something that's closer to like a 1 to 1 gear ratio. So I think they have to redesign a lot of that, which is why we're not seeing videos of Optimus walking really quickly or doing tasks that involve a lot of walking, because it's speed limited. Remember, it's not the only one. A lot of others have maybe made the same mistake there. So there's that. Now, the other question, and this will kind of go back, is that I suspect they're going to be doing a complete rethink in the actuators. And there was, I bet there were some heated design meetings, because there were probably people that poured their heart and soul in some of these actuators, only to find out that maybe they're wrong and they have to go through and do a rethink. And then you know how those kind of meetings go. At the same time, they were probably starting to tool up their actuator lines for this. And now they're realizing that, brakes on that. So I'd like to know what the status is of the actuator ramp up line and whether that's in a holding pattern.
And you also have multiple actuators. I mean, not only multiple total, but multiple designs.
Yeah. What's the groups? So they're limiting the groups to basically there were 7 for Gen 2. Right. We don't know if they're going to be increasing that or decreasing that. Right. There's advantages and disadvantages to that. One is that, you can reuse it, but the disadvantage is it means that you're compromising every single axis. I mean, there's an ideal actuator for that axis, right? And you're compromising, you're either overcompensating, but giving it something too powerful, which means now you're carrying more mass than you need to have, or something that's a little bit underpowered. So you got to kind of go through and make sure that, you really have that optimized, right? So do you increase that number? And the other thing comes down to is the linear drives that they had, whether they, how many of those are going to have, because they put a lot of them in the leg, because that seems to be the way we work, right? And Elon has pointed out that they're doing a little bit of biomimicry. So if you're taking that approach, it's like, the Optimus leg is like exactly how human leg works, but no one else is doing that. Everyone else is just saying, that's because nature can't make a rotary motor at the knee, but we're going to put a rotary motor at the knee, and maybe that's actually better for a mechanical design than for a biological design. And so you have to be careful. I mean, you get inspiration, but at the same time, I mean, remember, birds flap their wings. They don't have propellers. Yeah. Yet there are no airplanes that flap their wings. They tried coming up with airplanes that flap, and it didn't work. Okay. So it's like, yeah, we get inspired by the airfoil. That's because the one thing nature can't do is really make a joint that spins nonstop. You know, it's like you're looking around, and I'll probably be proven wrong somewhere. There's probably some weird mollusk somewhere that has, or maybe like the flagella. I think on bacteria. Yeah. I think a lot of those are like a spinning motor. But when you start getting in these macro scale kind of things, I mean, you really don't see that kind of thing because nature can't make it that way. But physics doesn't say you can't.
Right.
And a lot of it is because with all joints, the problem with all joints is that we're all seeing, get the cabling in there. How do you get the cabling in there? It's like, okay, so if I'm going to have an arm that is able to spin infinitely like a motor and stuff like that, it's going to be covered with skin, right? You know, you got to have a joint in there. What about the blood flow? How does that go through? What's going to go to the veins? You know, you just got to look at it. It's like, yeah, I guess you can't do it. So making spinny things is hard biologically. And it's even a challenge mechanically. All the things you have to do through it, all the gaskets and the other things. And, you know, the trick you try to do to get the electricity through because you have these brushes or other ways of being able to do it because you don't want the wires to wrap up either. So, so we're going to kind of see where that is, which brings me to the last question. So that was like question 9 about the actuators. And 10 is how much they're considering tendon drives. Whether they're kind of looking into that. And we know they're going to be putting tendons in the hands. It just absolutely makes sense. Right. But once you start solving that and start looking at that, you begin to say, wait, maybe there's some other places that this might come in handy. Yeah. And I did kind of a breakdown with on the Soft Robotics podcast with Mara yesterday, where we looked at the 1X patent on how they are doing their tendon drives and what's in there. And there's just so many advantages to it, you know, the rationales and everything that's on, especially when you're trying to pack all your actuators in the forearm for your hand. And the reason I point that out is if you look at Optimus, the way it works, you need 3 degrees of freedom just on the wrists. Right. And the way it's done below the elbow, there's an actuator that takes the first half of it that allows the whole thing to spin around like that. So that means you only have this fraction of your wrist left over for anything you're going to put in there. Well, right now, Gen 2 has 2 really big actuators in there that allow the wrist to move. We've seen that, those big black actuators that are on there. And if you look at that, it's like, well, there's not a whole lot of room left to put anything else. And I'm suspecting what they're going to want to do is, you know, if I could design some sort of actuator that was maybe long and skinny like this, that just was able to pull a string in or a tendon, you know, a distance of an inch and a half, because that's about all you need to be able to get the fingers to close, right? So you make some sort of mechanism that's designed to do it. So imagine just taking that inspiration like from a solenoid or something where it's just kind of pull on down it. So now you get something skinny like that. Well, I can start, you know, picking up a bunch of these, you know, actuators that are about that size. I got to get how many of them? I got 4, 5, 6. I need to have 7 of these things here, and then pack them into my forearm. All right. And I still am not talking about the actuator I need to make this go. Yeah. All right. So is it going to be one of these? Because we know these things, that's pretty small, you know, and it's the diameter of what they currently have is a little bit bigger than that. So, you know, whether they're figuring doing something like that, I don't know. Okay. So we need that thing needs to be a little bit bigger. So is that going to fit in there along with these things? That's quite a pile of little actuators we're trying to stick in there, and then have these beefy ones to allow us to go ahead and do that. And the thing that was like the genius of the 1X design is that the actuators that are used to actually actuate this joint is not actually here. Okay, like a lot of people will put a motor at the elbow and say, hey, guess what? I get a motor at the elbow, and the motor can act as a hinge. It's a 2-in-1. That's an absolute great thing. Well, they've kind of designed it in a way that they have an actuator that's actually there, that's kind of part of the joint, and they have a differential joint, but the actual actuator for the elbow was way back up here. So the thing that's taking up the elbow are the actuators that you need for here. Okay. And the actuator that you need for like this lower half here, because remember I was saying like the problem you have is that this is already taken just to be able to do that in Optimus. That's actually way up here at the shoulder. And up here at the shoulder is the one that's for that. And it's like, well, that's pretty clever, because what you're doing is you're taking the mass that used to be hanging out over here, for just moving the wrist, and you've backed it off here.
Yeah.
And now better moment of inertia, less mass. That means the actual motor torques you need here suddenly go down. And that means the shoulder, the effort the shoulder needs to be able to make everything also goes down. It's like, yeah, well, I've moved that shoulder all the way back to the torso. And what's actually the shoulders, the thing is, so what they've done is they've moved the problem closer to the torso, reducing the mass and making everything else. And then that just opens up all sorts of space. So I'm thinking, look, that there's going to be a lot of similarities between the 22 DOF Tesla hand and that, because it has been stated that it's shouldn't be considered a hand. It should be considered a whole new lower arm.
Right.
And that's what's coming up. So that's, I would say, kind of my big question is, like, how they end up doing that, and that then they probably might be going to some sort of almost tendon drive mechanism themselves for at least the wrist.
Yeah.
And whether that starts to then propagate through, like, well, since we figured out how that, do we try to do something also like that for the elbow? And again, my biggest pet peeve is, like, I hate the shoulders on every single humanoid bot. I've yet to see one. The guys that are kind of the closest, but still it's a bit cumbersome, is Aptronics, because they're all linear drives.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, we have a ball and socket joint here.
Right.
And the problem with the ball and socket joint is it's really hard to actuate. It's really easy to build, but it's like, well, how do you make the motors to make it go ahead? And that's why everyone gave up with it and came up with these serial stack motors to be able to do it. The only way to do it is that you need something like tendons or linear actuators that would be kind of push-pull rods around it. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine like a collarbone that has something that comes out and something else that comes in there. That's Aptronics has done that. And so their joint is not a ball and socket, from what I can tell. I haven't got really good engineering drawings, but just looking really closely, it looks like it's a type of carbon joint also for that. And then they have like the third axis that's going to be doing the movement in there. And that's getting close. It's still not quite a ball and socket joint. And so we'll see whether anyone decides to take that leap if they're able to figure out a different form of actuation. And the only reason we're going down this, like, could you be doing it with tendons kind of thing, is because machine learning allows you to figure that out. Because it's a complicated problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
The absolutely complicated problem. Remember, you turn your wrist or something like that, you basically are stretching all the tendons that are going out here are supposed to move your hand, right? So that means sort of the act of just moving your hand or your wrist is kind of almost wanting to make your fingers move. And the reason your fingers don't move is that your head says, hey, you got to do this little thing here to make sure your fingers kind of stay the way they are. But in a mechanical system, that's going to be a problem, which is why you would need to have a neural net that sort of understands the interplay. It's really hard to model and just difficult to model. So no one wants to do it. But now you could potentially do that. But what that means is that whatever things they've been learning with Gen 2 will not transfer easily to Gen 3.
Right.
And this also becomes kind of a question. If Gen 3 is so different than Gen 1, they'll be taking, let's say, some of the things they've learned, not the learnings, but what they've learned about training, what they have to do with training, and they may have to redo it. Right. Because as we can see, it's sometimes not as easy as you think it is. Otherwise, FSD would already be in the Cybertruck, which brings me all the way back to the first question.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
You bookended it. How about that? Yeah. That's supposed to be, a really clever thing to do with, your storytelling, is to bookend. Yeah. Good for you.
It wasn't planned. It just turned out that way. It wasn't planned.
All right. Well, okay. So those are your 10 questions. And then I guess we didn't have very much robotic news this last week.
That's, I guess, kind of twisted in there was a little bit. The closest we had was what Elon's statements at the All-In Summit, where he talked about that the hand was in a prototype that are still in development. Right. And I'm trying to think what does. There wasn't really anything that more or less he colored in some of the pieces that we already knew that we're putting in place. But I think part of it was like the numbers to scale up. Yeah. So the scale up that seems to be quite achievable. That we know in order to go from like 1 to 1 million in 6 years requires a 10x each year.
Yeah.
But if the idea is that they're going to be doing 1,000 next year. That means they'll kind of scaled up to that. And that's not surprising because they've been working on all these other systems and whatever the components need to go in there. So they could have 1,000 next year. And if they do, that means you just need to 3x from there to be able, per year to be able to hit that million target within 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. And it also makes sense to me that there's going to be, probably at least every 18 months to 2 years, a revision, a major upgrade, an update to it because of all the learnings that are going to come on there. And the learning is going to be, long and far. I mean, part of it is like, what's the best way to train these things and everything else, and breakthroughs in materials and just breakthroughs in actuators. I mean, come on. It's like, everyone has said, and I think it was even Barrington made something like, until the EV came out, the whole electric motor business was moribund. No one was really doing much. It was like a little bit of it. There were some improvements in motors for industrial bots. They went from AC drives to DC drives and tried to make them more compact and everything else. So there were some marginal improvements in there, but not what you really needed for the other. And then maybe the drones started to kickstart that a little bit, which is, I think, why the Chinese have this advantage, is because they've been working on all sorts of different motor designs for drones that have a certain amount of crossover capability that's going to be in there. So what I think is going to happen is a lot of people are going to really be looking at it and restudying it and start teaching it in engineering schools and stuff like that. It's like, oh, actuators and motors are really exciting now. What can we do? What kind of materials are going to be out there? What kind of geometric configurations can you have? Let's really start redesigning and thinking of it. And then you probably see breakthroughs there. Then when you start seeing those breakthroughs, and that means there's all kinds of things that you can start doing. And so that's kind of what I assume is going to happen, is that it's certainly going to turn around and someone comes out with some new technology that you're like, yeah, we got to incorporate that. And we've got to incorporate that quick because our competitor is going to put that in there as well.
Yeah, I think it was about, I would say it was at least 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, that somebody made the statement that you can tell how wealthy a person was by how many motors they had in their home. And, you started thinking about all the different things that use motors and, to do all kinds of, the dishwasher and the garbage disposal, and just keep going down the line. And
then there are clever designs of doing things that you think you would need a motor, but it's not there. So like hydraulically actuated motors, I mean, like, in your shower or something like that, those spray, there's not an electric motor in there. Right. Someone's figured out, well, wait a minute, let's take the flow of the water and figure out how to turn it into something else that will be useful. And you'll see that in a lot of other places. Like I'm amazed at like hot water heaters, gas hot water heaters, stuff like that. They don't need electricity to operate. They operate on pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like between the water pressure and the gas pressure. So when it's amazing. It's like when the power goes out, your gas water heater still works. It's like, okay, how does that work? It's like, so again, there are these clever ways of like, how do you make things that can do something that's mechanical, open a valve or close a valve based on pressure differentials and everything else.
Sure.
And so, I think there's going to be a lot of people kind of looking and re-looking at a lot of these things to see how they can work. I mean, just look at the manifold in your sprinkler system and how that works and how that thing opens up and closes. And it's a really clever little thing. And basically it is using hydraulic differential to force a valve to open up. So yeah, there's like a little electric input in there to do something, but it's not putting mechanically that much force in there. And it's then taking the advantage of a pressure differential to pop that thing open. And it's like, you look at these things, oh, wow, that is really clever, as opposed to, because we think when you try to open up a valve, I mean, we got to like turn, and you imagine that's what's going on in your sprinklers. Is like, nope, they got something that's really clever down there and that doesn't do much. Again, it's a solenoid, simple little solenoid, open and close. Yeah.
All right, Scott. All right. So we've got your 10 questions. We'll add those to the rest. Now, folks, seriously, let me know what you think about Scott's questions. You can clean them up. You can say, hey, what if you asked it this way? He even suggested that at the beginning. You could ask your own questions. You could add on top of what Scott has just done. Or maybe it just inspired you to ask a question about something completely outside of this entire range. But we're just trying to get as many of these questions together and then try to figure out which ones are really at the top of the list for everybody. And then we'll start asking them. Maybe we'll put them up on X. Maybe we'll send them all at one time. We'll have 100 really good questions. We'll send them to Elon in one swell swoop, and maybe he'll actually respond. to some of them. We'll think about methodologies as we get closer.
Do we even know when the Q3 earnings call is? I think it's after 10/10.
You never know for sure. They even changed the date this last quarter. I mean, the day of the week, the last quarter.
Yeah. Usually it's what, the third week or so, or
it's usually around the third week, and people.
So it's going to be after 10/10, not before.
Oh, yeah, after 10/10.
So again, that's what makes it kind of crazy. It's like, all right, so the questions you want to ask at the earnings call is going to be informed by a lot of what you learned in 10/10. And again, these, like I say, almost none of my questions here are probably the ones that you would ask at an earnings call or even at the 10/10 event, but still, they are questions that I would like to somehow get answers to.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So thanks so much. And then for those of you who really like to watch what Brian White has to say about things, he and I did a video yesterday. I'm going to put the card right here for you to go take a look at that one. And Scott, as always, great having you on board. Thank you so much for informing us. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.
Yeah. Bye.